All right, so looks like we're diving into nuclear energy today. You guys have sent in a ton of articles, and it seems like there's a lot of debate. Is it the answer to our energy problems or, well, a radioactive nightmare?
Yeah, it really is quite the paradox, isn't it? The
That,
sources we've got here paint two very different pictures of nuclear energy. Some are all about it being this clean, powerful solution to, well, our energy needs, but then others focus on the risks,
mm-hmm.
the waste disposal, and of course the potential for, really catastrophic accidents.
Yeah, exactly. And I gotta say, some of these figures are pretty wild. One article here says that just 1 kilogram of uranium can produce the same amount of energy as 20,000 kilograms of coal. That's mind-blowing. But then
It would do about things like Fukushima in 2011.
yeah.
And well, it's hard not to feel a bit uneasy about the whole thing. Yeah, I get it. It's totally understandable to feel conflicted. I mean, the potential benefits are huge. We can't deny that. But the risks, well, they're pretty serious too, I think, to really understand this whole debate. We need to kind of start from the basics. What exactly is nuclear energy? How does it actually work?
Okay, yeah, let's break that down a bit. I know it involves splitting atoms or something like that, but I'll admit my physics knowledge is a little rusty.
All right, well, imagine you're splitting a cookie in half. You get two smaller pieces, right? Well, nuclear fission is kind of like that. But instead of a cookie, we're splitting the nucleus of an atom, usually uranium. And instead of crumbs, you get this massive release of energy.
So it's like a super-powered cookie break. Okay, I think I'm getting it. But how do we actually use that energy, to power our homes and everything?
All right, so that's where nuclear reactors come in. In a typical reactor, you have these uranium fuel rods, and they're bombarded with neutrons. This causes a chain reaction of nuclear fission, releasing heat, which is used to create steam. And that steam drives turbines to produce electricity. It's actually a really efficient process, but it's also incredibly complex. And it needs, all these super strict safety protocols. And did you know there are actually different types of reactors, each with their own, pluses and minuses? For example, the most common type is a pressurized water reactor, but some people think molten salt reactors are safer and more efficient.
Wow, I had no idea there was so much variety in nuclear technology. So let's talk about those upsides for a minute. Why are some folks so enthusiastic about nuclear power? What makes it so appealing?
Well, one of the biggest draws is definitely its energy density. Like we said, a tiny amount of uranium can create a huge amount of energy, way more than fossil fuels. This means we'd need to mine, transport, and process way less fuel, which is good for the environment and the economy. Imagine a world where we could seriously cut down our reliance on fossil fuels and avoid a lot of those geopolitical issues that come with them.
Yeah, that's a really strong argument. And I think a lot of people are really worried about climate change these days. So does nuclear energy help with reducing those greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes, absolutely. Nuclear plants release basically zero greenhouse gases when they're running. So they're a big player in the fight against climate change. In fact, some studies actually suggest that using more nuclear power could be essential to meeting global emissions targets. Though it is important to remember that building and dismantling those plants, well, that does have some environmental impact.
That makes sense. So it seems like this issue is a lot more complicated than just good versus bad.
Exactly. Every single energy source comes with its own trade-offs. And with nuclear, those can be pretty, well, daunting. For instance, the whole issue of nuclear waste. That's a big concern for a lot of people.
Right, I was just thinking about that. How do we safely get rid of waste that stays radioactive for thousands of years? And what about those accidents? It's hard to forget those images from Chernobyl and Fukushima.
Yeah, you've hit on two of the biggest worries about nuclear power, that long-term storage of nuclear waste. It's complex and expensive, and there's no easy fix. We're talking about containing super dangerous material for longer than human civilization has existed, basically. And while modern reactors are designed to be much safer, the risk of accidents, even if it's small, well, we can't ignore it. Those events can have devastating and long-lasting effects on people and the environment.
It really sounds like we're walking a tightrope with nuclear energy. Huge potential on one side, and serious risks on the other. And what about the cost? I imagine building these high-tech power plants must cost a fortune.
You're absolutely right. Building a nuclear power plant is a multi-billion-dollar project, usually somewhere between 6 and 9 billion US dollars. And decommissioning them when they reach the end of their life, that's also incredibly expensive and complicated. So those economic factors are a big part of the whole debate too.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but also about the economics and politics of it all.
Exactly. Decisions about energy are never made in isolation. They're always tied up with economics, politics, and social values.
This is getting even more interesting. It sounds like we need to look at the bigger picture. And speaking of the bigger picture, our sources also talk about the rise of renewable energy, like solar and wind power. Maybe those offer a safer and more sustainable way forward.
That's a great point, and it's definitely gaining more and more attention worldwide. The cost of renewable energy technologies, especially solar, has dropped dramatically in recent years, which makes them way more competitive. Maybe instead of splitting atoms, we should be focusing on harnessing the power of the sun and wind.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Let's explore that more in depth. What exactly are the advantages of those renewable sources compared to nuclear?
Well, first off, renewables are inherently safer. There's no risk of meltdowns. And you don't have to worry about radioactive waste that needs to be managed for centuries. They rely on resources that are constantly being replenished, like sunlight and wind. So they're a truly sustainable energy source, unlike fossil fuels or uranium.
That's a strong argument for sure. So are renewables the ultimate solution then? Is it really that simple?
Well, if only it were that simple. Renewables have a lot of potential, but they also have their own challenges. One of the biggest ones is intermittency. The sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing. So we need a way to store that energy for when we need it.
That makes sense. So what are our options for storing that renewable energy, and how do those compare to the issues of storing nuclear waste?
That's a really important question. And it's one that researchers are working hard to figure out. There's a ton of innovation happening in energy storage right now, from better batteries to something called pumped hydro storage, where we use extra solar energy to pump water uphill. And then when we need energy, the water flows downhill, spinning turbines to create electricity.
So we're basically making giant batteries out of mountains and water. That's pretty amazing. But what about those huge wind turbines you see popping up everywhere? How does wind power work exactly? And does it face similar problems to solar?
Wind power is another really interesting technology, and it's based on a simple idea. Wind turbines capture the energy of the wind and turn it into electricity. The bigger the turbine blades and the stronger the wind, the more energy you get. Like solar, wind power is clean and sustainable, but it also has that same intermittency problem. We can't always count on the wind to blow when we need it.
So storage is super important for both solar and wind power if we want to rely on them. Are there any other promising storage technologies on the horizon?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of exciting research happening. One area that's particularly interesting is hydrogen fuel cells. We can use extra renewable energy to split water molecules, which creates hydrogen gas. We can store that hydrogen and then use it in fuel cells to make electricity later. It's a really clean and efficient process. And it has the potential to completely change how we store energy.
Wow, it sounds like science fiction, but it's happening right now. It seems like these renewable energy technologies are advancing so quickly. But I imagine different parts of the world have different access to these resources. Is renewable energy viable everywhere? Or are there limitations based on geography and climate?
That's a crucial point. The potential for renewable energy really depends on where you are. For example, places with lots of sunshine are great for solar power, while areas with strong, consistent winds are good for wind farms. And some places have access to geothermal energy, which uses heat from inside the earth.
So it sounds like a diverse approach is key, using a mix of different renewable technologies that work best for each region.
You got it. And it's not just about the technology itself. It's also about having the right policies and infrastructure in place to support renewable energy development. We're seeing some countries, especially in Asia, really leading the way in adopting renewables, driven by government support and regulations.
That's great to hear. It sounds like Asia is really embracing that shift to a more sustainable energy future. Can you give us some specific examples of those policies and initiatives?
Sure. China, for example, has become a global leader in making solar panels, and they've built these huge solar and wind projects. India is also rapidly increasing its use of renewable energy, with ambitious goals for solar and wind power. And countries like Japan and South Korea are investing a lot in research and development to create the next generation of renewable technologies.
It's really encouraging to see these nations taking such a proactive approach to fighting climate change and becoming more energy independent. It makes you wonder if there are lessons we can learn from them that could be applied to other parts of the world.
Absolutely. The experiences of these Asian countries can teach us a lot about what works and what doesn't. They show how important it is to have clear policy goals, supportive regulations, and partnerships between the public and private sectors to really drive the growth of renewable energy.
That's a great point. It's not just about the technology, it's about creating the right environment for it to flourish. But even with all these advancements, Are there any potential downsides to relying so heavily on renewables?
Well, like with any energy source, there are some trade-offs to consider. One concern is the potential impact on the environment from these large-scale renewable energy projects. For example, wind farms can sometimes interfere with birds, and solar farms need a lot of land, which could affect ecosystems. But with careful planning and mitigation, we can minimize those impacts.
Right, so responsible development is key, just like with any big infrastructure project. But I'm also curious about the economics. Are renewables really cost competitive with fossil fuels and nuclear?
That's a complicated question. And the answer depends on a bunch of things, like government policies, technology, and the cost of those traditional energy sources. But here's the exciting thing. The cost of renewable energy has been steadily dropping, while the cost of fossil fuels has stayed pretty unpredictable in many places around the world. Renewable energy is now cost competitive with fossil fuels, and sometimes even cheaper.
Wow, that's a real game changer. It sounds like the economic argument for renewables is getting stronger all the time. But are there any other potential challenges or drawbacks we haven't talked about yet?
Hmm. One challenge that's worth thinking about is the need to modernize our electricity grid. Our current grid was designed for those big centralized power plants, like coal or nuclear, which produce a steady flow of electricity. But renewables are intermittent, so they need a more flexible and dynamic grid.
So it's not just about adding more solar panels and wind turbines. We need to rethink the way our whole energy system works.
Exactly. We need smarter grids that can handle the fluctuating supply of renewable energy, balance supply and demand in real time, and seamlessly integrate energy storage solutions. And that means investing in grid infrastructure and new technologies, like smart meters, microgrids, and demand-side management.
It sounds like we're on the verge of a major shift in how we produce, distribute, and use energy. But with all these complex factors to consider, how can we ensure a smooth and fair transition to a more sustainable energy future?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's going to take collaboration between governments, industries, and communities. We need to invest in research and development, create supportive policies, and empower people to make informed decisions about their energy use.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've explored nuclear energy, dug into renewables, and uncovered all these interconnected challenges and opportunities, but I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this complex and constantly evolving topic.
You're right. There's so much more to discuss, like the role of energy efficiency and conservation, and the potential of new technologies like fusion power. And of course, we can't forget about the human side of things, the social and ethical considerations that influence our energy choices.
It seems like this energy journey is far from over. We've got a lot more ground to cover, and I'm excited to dive deeper.
Well then, let's keep exploring. In our next segment, we'll bring it all together. And think about some thought-provoking questions that might just change your perspective on the future of energy. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we've talked about how both nuclear energy and renewables have their good and bad points. It seems like there's no easy answer when it comes to, powering our future. But I'm really curious to learn more about those renewables. What are the actual technologies involved, and how do they actually work?
Well, when we talk about renewables, we're basically talking about energy sources that are naturally replenished, like solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and even biomass. Each of these uses natural processes to generate electricity, offering a more sustainable alternative to, well, fossil fuels and uranium.
Okay, so let's start with solar power. It seems like it's become super popular lately, especially with the cost of solar panels going way down. What's driving that popularity, and what are the key technologies behind it?
You're right, solar power is definitely having a moment.
Yep.
And yeah, those falling costs are a big part of it, especially in Asia. Basically, advances in technology and economies of scale have made solar panels a lot more affordable. And in some places, solar is now the cheapest source of new electricity. The basic idea behind solar power is actually pretty simple. You have these photovoltaic cells, which make up the solar panels, and they convert sunlight directly into electricity. It's a really clean and efficient process, and it's becoming more and more accessible to, everyday people and businesses.
I've actually been thinking about getting solar panels for my house. It seems like a smart move these days. But one thing I've been wondering about is what happens when the sun goes down? Can solar really provide reliable energy all the time?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people have, and it gets to the heart of one of the biggest challenges with solar: intermittency. The sun doesn't shine 24/7, obviously, so we need a way to store that solar energy for when it's nighttime or cloudy. But the good news is there's been some incredible progress in energy storage technology, and it's changing super fast. We have batteries that are getting more efficient and cheaper all the time, And then there's pumped hydro storage, where you use excess solar energy to pump water uphill. And when you need energy, that water flows downhill, turning turbines to create electricity.
Wow, it's like we're building giant batteries out of mountains and water. That's pretty awesome. But what about wind power? Those giant wind turbines I see popping up everywhere. How does that work? And does it face similar challenges to solar?
Wind power is another really cool technology. It's based on a pretty straightforward principle. Basically, wind turbines capture the kinetic energy of the wind and convert it into electricity. The bigger the turbine blades and the stronger the wind, the more energy you get. And just like solar, wind power is clean and sustainable, but it also has that same issue of intermittency. You can't always rely on the wind to blow when you need it.
So it sounds like storage is crucial for both solar and wind if we want to make them our main sources of energy. Are there any other interesting storage technologies being developed?
Oh, definitely. There's so much cutting-edge research going on in this field. One really exciting area is hydrogen fuel cells. The idea is that you can use excess renewable energy to split water molecules, which creates hydrogen gas. You can then store that hydrogen and use it in fuel cells to generate electricity on demand. It's a very clean and efficient process, and it has the potential to be a real game changer for energy storage.
That sounds pretty futuristic, but it's happening now, which is pretty amazing. It seems like all these renewable energy technologies are advancing incredibly fast. But I also know that different regions have different levels of access to these resources. Is renewable energy a viable option everywhere? Or are there limitations based on things like geography and climate?
That's a great point. The potential for renewable energy definitely varies depending on where you are in the world. For example, areas with a lot of sunshine are perfect for solar power, while places with strong and consistent winds are ideal for wind farms. And some regions have access to geothermal energy, which uses the heat from the Earth's core.
So it sounds like a diversified approach is key, using a mix of different renewable technologies that work best for each region's specific resources and needs.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technology itself, it's also about having the right policies and infrastructure to support renewable energy development. We're seeing some countries, particularly in Asia, really leading the charge in renewable energy adoption. And a lot of that is driven by government incentives and supportive regulations.
That's really inspiring to hear. It sounds like Asia is really taking the lead in creating a more sustainable energy future. Can you give us some specific examples of those policies and initiatives that are driving that growth in Asia?
Sure. China, for instance, has become a global leader in manufacturing solar panels, and they've implemented these massive solar and wind projects. India is also quickly expanding its renewable energy capacity, with ambitious targets for solar and wind power generation. And countries like Japan and South Korea are investing a lot in research and development to create the next generation of renewable technologies.
It's encouraging to see those nations being so proactive in addressing climate change and promoting energy independence. Are there any lessons we can learn from their experiences, things that could be applied to other parts of the world?
Definitely. The successes and challenges faced by those Asian countries can provide valuable insights for policymakers and investors all over the globe. They really highlight the importance of having clear policy goals, supportive regulations, and strong public-private partnerships to really drive the growth of the renewable energy sector.
That's a great point. It's about creating the right environment where those technologies can thrive. But even with all this progress, are there any downsides to relying so much on renewables?
Well, just like with any energy source, there are trade-offs. One concern is the potential environmental impact of building these large-scale renewable energy projects. For example, wind farms can sometimes disrupt bird migration patterns, and solar farms need a lot of land, which can affect ecosystems. But careful planning and mitigation measures can help minimize those impacts.
That makes sense. It's all about responsible development, just like with any major infrastructure project. I'm also curious about the economic side of things. Are renewables truly cost competitive with fossil fuels and nuclear?
That's a complex question. The answer really depends on a number of factors, including government policies, technology advancements, and the cost of traditional energy sources. But one really positive trend we're seeing is that the cost of renewable energy has been consistently going down, while the cost of fossil fuels has remained pretty volatile. In many parts of the world, renewable energy is now cost competitive with fossil fuels, and in some cases, it's even cheaper.
Wow, that's a game changer. It seems like the economic argument for renewables is getting stronger every day, but are there any other potential challenges or drawbacks we haven't discussed yet?
One challenge that's worth considering is the need to modernize our electricity grid. Our current grid was designed for those big, centralized power plants, like coal-fired or nuclear power plants, which generate a constant flow of electricity. Renewables, on the other hand, are intermittent, as we've talked about, so we need a grid that's more flexible and responsive.
So it's not just about adding more solar panels and wind turbines. We need to fundamentally rethink how our entire energy system operates.
That's right. We need smarter grids that can effectively manage the fluctuating supply of renewable energy. We need to be able to balance supply and demand in real time and seamlessly integrate energy storage solutions into the grid. This requires significant investment in grid infrastructure and new technologies like smart meters, microgrids, and demand-side management.
It sounds like we're on the cusp of a major transformation in how we produce, distribute, and consume energy. But with all these complex factors to consider, how can we ensure a smooth and equitable transition to a more sustainable energy future?
That's a really important question. And to answer it, we need collaboration between governments, industries, and communities. We need to invest in research and development, create supportive policies, and empower individuals to make informed choices about their energy consumption.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. We've explored the complexities of nuclear energy, we've delved into the world of renewables, and we've discovered all these interconnected challenges and opportunities. But I have a feeling we've only just scratched the surface of this complex and evolving issue.
You're absolutely right. There's so much more to explore. We could talk about the role of energy efficiency and conservation, or the potential of emerging technologies like fusion power. And of course, we can't forget about the human element, the social and ethical considerations that shape our energy choices.
It seems like this energy journey is far from over. We've got a lot more to cover, and I, for one, am ready to dive even deeper.
Well then, let's keep exploring. In our last segment, we're going to bring it all together, and we'll consider some thought-provoking questions that might just shift your perspective on the future of energy.
Wow, we've really covered a lot in this deep dive, haven't we? Nuclear energy, the rise of renewables, it's been fascinating. But I'm still kind of wrestling with that big question. What is the best way forward? How do we balance our need for clean, reliable energy with those concerns about safety, costs, and, making sure it's all sustainable in the long run?
Yeah, those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? It's what everyone's trying to figure out. Policymakers, scientists, communities all over the world. And there isn't an easy answer, But by really thinking about the trade-offs, embracing new technologies, and having these open conversations, well, we could hopefully find our way to a better energy future.
You mentioned trade-offs. What are some of the big ones we need to consider when making decisions about energy?
I think one of the most basic ones is between energy security and the environmental impact. Those traditional fossil fuels, they offer a certain level of energy security, but, well, they come with a huge environmental cost. All those greenhouse gas emissions and the pollutions.
Right. And we saw how nuclear energy, while it's low in emissions, it has its own challenges with the waste disposal and the possibility of those, scary accidents.
Exactly. And renewables, as promising as they are, they have that intermittency issue we talked about, and they need a lot of investment in things like grid upgrades and energy storage.
It's like every option has its pros and cons. It's almost like trying to solve a giant puzzle, but we don't even have all the pieces.
I like that analogy, the puzzle. And to make things even trickier, those pieces are always changing. Technology is always evolving, and our understanding of the energy landscape is constantly shifting.
So how do we make good decisions when things are so uncertain?
Well, one key thing is to diversify. Instead of relying on just one source, we need to explore lots of different energy solutions, ones that are tailored to each region's specific needs and situation.
So a mix of renewables, maybe some nuclear, and perhaps even some fossil fuels for now.
It's possible. The best mix will depend on where you are. Things like what resources are available, the economic situation, and environmental priorities. But having a diverse energy portfolio, well, it can make things more secure, reduce our dependence on just one source, and give us more flexibility as technology keeps developing.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like creating a more resilient system where different energy sources support each other and create more stable and sustainable, well, everything. But it sounds really complicated to manage.
It definitely requires a smart approach to planning and management. We need more research and development, better collaboration between industries and governments, and ways to empower consumers to make smart choices about how they use energy.
Speaking of choices, one thing that's really stood out to me in this deep dive is how much power we have as individuals. Even small changes in our everyday lives can add up and make a difference.
Absolutely. Everything we do has an impact, from using energy-efficient appliances to driving less. All those choices contribute to the bigger picture.
So it's not just about waiting for governments and big companies to fix things. We all have a responsibility to think about our own energy use and make decisions that align with, well, what we believe in.
I completely agree. We're all part of this energy ecosystem, and our choices matter. By conserving energy, supporting renewable energy projects, and speaking up for sustainable policies, we can all help create a cleaner, more equitable energy future.
It's empowering to think that we're not just passively using energy. We can actually be part of shaping the future. But I have to be honest, it can feel a little overwhelming sometimes. There's so much information out there, so many complex issues. It's hard to know where to even start.
I get it, it can be a lot. But remember, every journey starts with a single step. Start by learning about the energy sources and technologies in your area. Look for ways to reduce your energy use at home and at work. Support businesses that are trying to be more sustainable. And most importantly, talk about energy with your friends, family, and community.
Those are great practical tips. It's all about taking action, even small ones, and being part of the solution.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Speak up for policies that support renewable energy, energy efficiency, and a fair and just transition to a sustainable energy future. Reach out to your elected officials, get involved in your community, and share what you know with others.
It's about making informed choices, speaking up, and working together to build the future we want to see. That's a pretty powerful way to wrap things up. We've explored the challenges, we've seen the possibilities, and now it's up to all of us to do our part.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's been an amazing deep dive into the world of energy. We've learned a lot, challenged some of our own ideas, and hopefully sparked some new ones.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope you've learned something new, and we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating topic. Until next time, keep those deep dives going.